Hey guys, it's Lewpac here and welcome to another Albion Online video. Today we're going to be taking a look at random dungeons, one of the main content features of the new Oberon update. I am doing another video of everything about Oberon very shortly on YouTube, but random dungeons are such a massive content change that I thought they needed a video all to themselves to sort of basically explain to you everything you need to know about random dungeons. So firstly, what are random dungeons exactly? So random dungeons are open world PvE areas. They're not private, so once you go into a random dungeon, you can be followed in by another group who might want to fight you for control of the dungeon. You might not even be the first person into a random dungeon. There may be another group ahead of you, and you have to make the decision, do you want to fight for the dungeon, or do you just want to move on and look for another one? Random dungeons, as the name suggests, are procedurally generated by the system, so they don't have fixed layouts. They're basically made up of like various sections, such as corridors, feature rooms, boss areas, etc. And the game has an algorithm to generate these dungeons. So if you do enough of them, you will start to recognize the rooms, and you'll find similarities between dungeons that you've run before, but they are randomly generated. So as Sandbox Interactive continue to add more room designs, tile sets and mobs in future patches as well, this is just the foundation for the concept. You're going to get more and more varied experiences, but you should in theory never find the exact same dungeon twice. Random dungeons also vary in length in terms of time to complete, so you might jump in one, smash through it in sort of 10 to 15 minutes, leave and move on to the next dungeon, but likewise you might also find a dungeon that goes 4 or 5 layers deep. You keep going down and down, and the challenges are increasing, and you could be in there over half an hour, so they're not always the same length either. So it's quite new, fresh content for the open world, especially for people who have been doing sort of those fixed dungeon locations where you run the same rotations over and over, and people who have been running the same 10 hardcore expeditions over and over. These will be a fresh challenge and a lot of fun, having played them on the test server. So let's talk about why random dungeons are so good. Why is everybody so hyped? What is the big deal with random dungeons? Well, firstly, they are amazing for fame farming. Fame being the XP equivalent of Albion and needed to progress in all things. They offer a really good fame return for mob kills. The mobs aren't insanely difficult. They do pose a challenge, especially some of the more elite dungeons and elite bosses. But the fame return is so good. They're really a great way to level a character. And off the back of that, they're very different to hardcore expeditions. You don't need this crazy blinged out 80 million silver hardcore expedition gear to take part in random dungeons, and you don't need a specific 5-man composition to do random dungeons. You can take a lot of off-meta builds as long as you do damage or can do your role effectively. You'll be able to do random dungeons. So anybody who's tried to get into hardcore expeditions and has found it very elitist in terms of IP caps and meta builds for the dungeons, random dungeons will be very refreshing. The next thing that's so good is for the PvP enthusiasts among you. They do have PvP potential. Now, they're not designed as a PvP environment. It's not like a Hellgate where you're forced to fight another team, but there's always the chance of PvP. If you're not the first to the dungeon, there may be another group already inside. Another group might come behind you and sort of be the second to the dungeon and want to fight you for control of it. And also there might even be groups out there roaming around looking for occupied dungeons just to kill the dungeon parties. However, with the amount of dungeons and how they spawn and despawn, which we'll talk about later, I don't think roaming for kills in dungeons is effective. However, any dungeon group should be prepared for PvP at any time, as with any open world content. And the last thing which I think makes them so good is that they're just varied content. You've got 4 different tile sets, so it's not fame farming in the same dungeon doing the same rotation for 10 hours. You've got 4 different tile sets. They're generated randomly. They can be different lengths, different difficulties, and on top of that you can also get enchanted versions, which we're going to talk about a bit later, for an even bigger challenge with even bigger rewards. And they put you out in the open world, so if you're guild and alliance based, you're going to be out in the open world in fighting gear. So if you've got open world call to arms such as mage, your mages are being raided, your castle's under attack, people are harassing your gatherers, you're going to be nearby to your stuff hopefully to jump out of the dungeon and get straight into PvP. So it's a great way to get players out in the open world, getting good fame and being able to use any build that they like within reason. So the next thing we're going to have to talk about is the entrances to random dungeons. Where are they? How do they spawn? And what do you need to do to find them? So firstly, I'm going to tell you there are 5 types of entrances that I have found on the test server to the random dungeons. Now, interestingly, usually a given cluster or tile of the map has a certain mob faction associated with it. So you'll find that sort of roaming mobs, those types of dungeons. This does not affect random dungeons. From what I've seen, all the 5 types of random dungeons can spawn in any tile. The only thing your current tile or cluster will determine is the tier of the dungeon. So for example, if you're in a tier 6 tile, you'll find tier 6 dungeons, tier 7, you'll find tier 7 dungeons, and so on and so forth. Maps, of course, will point you to a specific tier of dungeon. We'll talk about maps a little bit later in the video, but that's just something to bear in mind. So the 5 types of dungeon entrance you can find. You've got the cultist dungeons, you've got the Morgana faction dungeons, you've got the Keeper faction dungeons, and the undead dungeons. So those are the 4 mob types you'll be familiar with from Albion. And then you've also got the 5th entrance, which is this sort of mysterious portal. Now, I'm not 100% sure of this, but from the limited testing I've done on the test server, it seems like the portal entrance can send you to any one of the 4 other types of dungeon. So that's really good to keep it fresh as you do these random dungeons, because of course, you know, doing the same faction over and over again would get quite repetitive, and you'd learn all the layouts and the various tiles and feature rooms. So it's really, really nice that you can get all of the different types without journeying from your favorite sort of zone, so to speak. There does seem to be a good amount of dungeons spawning in every zone, so it shouldn't be too hard to find them. Generally, if you have your group split up and search, you'll find one quick enough. They seem to be more off-the-road locations. They don't appear to spawn inside territories either, but honestly, finding a dungeon in the tile you've chosen really should not be too difficult. They're fairly obvious. Once you're inside the dungeon, obviously you and your group are going to need to clear it. I'm not really going to go too in depth into this because obviously everyone's experience is going to be different because the dungeons are generated randomly. But you should be doing dungeons, you shouldn't be doing dungeons above your current Reaver level. Most experienced players will be maxed Reaver level 8 anyway, but for newer players, stick to dungeons at your maximum Reaver level if possible. Generally, you want a good mix of single target DPS and some AoE for the smaller trash packs that you'll encounter. There's a lot of little mobs in the dungeons that you can sort of group up and AoE down if you've got the capacity. You're going to want a tank and a healer. And just bear in mind things like energy management, maybe a druid cowl. In certain dungeons, Knight's Helms are quite nice as well because there's a lot of knockback mechanics and displacement mechanics. But honestly, really anything goes within reason as long as your builds make sense. And you guys will, half the fun is figuring it out for yourself. I don't want to say this is the build to bring this exact build or you will fail, because that's just no fun. People should be able to play builds that they enjoy in Albion. That's the beauty of a classless system, and you guys will have a lot of fun figuring it out. But generally it goes like this: you'll explore the dungeon, you'll fight your way through, and as you go through, you'll clear trash mobs, you'll hit feature rooms, and then you'll meet mini bosses and an end boss. Now, in the dungeons, some things to note: they vary in length. So some dungeons you'll finish quickly, whereas some dungeons go down and down and down. I think the furthest I've gone down is 4 floors of dungeon, maybe even 5, and I've had up to sort of 7 or 8 bosses in a single dungeon. So they can be long, they can be short. It's completely random. They're fairly linear. Sometimes there's a side path that leads to a feature room, but generally you just follow them through to the end. And once you've cleared the dungeon, you A out and you can either go and bank your loot, head back to town, or just look for another dungeon if you're ready to go. So things to look out for in the dungeon are the new shrines. Now these shrines give you one of 2 buffs according to the developers, although I've only seen the fame buff so far. They either give you a massive boost to your fame for 4 minutes or a big boost to your silver gain for a few minutes. You have to kill the mobs guarding the shrines in order to be able to activate it, and your team does have to stand very close to the shrine to get the buff. We did some testing with this, with people being farther away to see if we could just send somebody back when it was time to fight the boss to tag the shrine, but you do actually need to be close to the shrine to activate it. The other thing you're going to see a lot of is the new Oberon feature, treasure chests. So these replace the existing smash them open chests that you've seen around the world. And the cool thing is these vary in rarity. So you've got sort of green chests, blue chests, purple chests, which is the standard enchantment system you'll be used to from Albion. And then there's orange legendary chests, which are rumoured to contain millions and millions of silver's worth of loot, although I didn't manage to get one on the test server at the time of making this video. Hopefully I'll have some more luck on the live server, of course. Again, these chests are linked to boss mobs generally, so you'll have to kill these mobs in order to open the chest. You won't be able to interact until the relevant mobs are killed. So the last thing I'm going to talk about on this video is the map system. So we've talked about riding around in the open world and finding these random dungeons, but there is also a new system coming in called maps. So what can happen is any mob in the open world, including inside random dungeons, can drop a dungeon map. Now a dungeon map will have a tier, and upon activating the dungeon map, as you can see here, what it will do, it will actually bring up your map automatically and show you the location of a random dungeon. Now this is kind of misleading because the dungeon that it shows you doesn't actually spawn until you get there. So one of the advantages of maps is that you can guarantee that nobody has got to this dungeon before you. Unlike a normal dungeon, you might not be the first person to get to it, so somebody might have already cleared it, or they might still be in there and you have to fight them. When you have a map, you can guarantee the dungeon is fresh and just for you. Now the second advantage of maps is super cool. The maps can be enchanted, so you can get a 0.1, a 0.2 or a 0.3 map. Now so you could get a 4.3 map, an 8.2, a 7.2, anything you're used to in the tier system exists in the map system. And the enchanted maps are tougher versions of their corresponding tier. So a 7.1 would be tougher than a normal tier 7 dungeon, 7.2 would be tougher than a 7.1, 7.3 would be tougher than a 7.2, and so on. And with great toughness comes great rewards. You will get more fame, you'll get better loot rolls, more chance of enchanted bosses, enchanted chests, and yeah, it's a really cool and challenging experience. Even in crazy good gear, people have been struggling with the 0.3 enchanted maps. They're not to be taken lightly, honestly, and they maybe need some fine-tuning. Some of the mobs are a bit easier than others, and some boss encounters are a bit easier than others, but half of the fun is discovering it all for yourself, so I'm not going to spoil any surprises. And of course, don't forget that the random dungeon system that Sandbox are implementing is just the framework. They plan to expand on it so they can add new tile sets, new bosses, new encounters. This is a whole new era for PvE in Albion, which definitely was lackluster in the past. these things are super fun to play. I've been having a bunch of fun on the test server with my guild, figuring stuff out, practicing stuff, like working out where we want to start dungeon running, what gear we're going to bring, team composition, stuff like that. And also figuring out the new encounters. There is some awesome boss encounters in there, and because of the enchanted chest system and the map system, it really does keep that sort of the MMO loot-driven thrill alive. And on the test server, of course, the black market, which supplies loot for the open world, has not been filled because it's an empty test server. So the loot's going to be much, much better on the live server. So if you have been opening chests on the test server, do bear in mind that because nobody's been filling the black market orders, the loot drops won't be very good on the test server. But on the live server, there's definitely going to be some awesome stuff dropping right from the get-go. If you're a market guy or a trading guy or a flipper, you want to keep a close eye on the black market, specifically around patch day and the week following it. But honestly, in general, because so many of these chests are going to be open, so many people are going to be making loot rolls off of chests and bosses, that the black market prices are going to go up rapidly correspondingly. So there's definitely going to be some good profit to be made from people who have got a sharp eye for the black market. So that's a good knock-on feature for the traders out there. So yeah, that's about all you need to know about Random Dungeons for now. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. Like I said, I plan to bring a lot more Albion content in the future. We've got loads of stuff coming up. I'll do a proper Oberon review video letting you know the impacts of Oberon. I've got to finish the Aspect series. I want to get back into the build spotlights and meta snapshots. So there's so much more to come. Next month as well, I will be visiting Berlin to go to the headquarters of Sandbox Interactive. I'll be streaming live from there on Twitch, and hopefully I'll get to make a few videos while I visit the HQ and see what they've got in store for us with the future of Albion Online. Right, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.